Hey everybody, welcome back to Sacred Health. I'm Carolyn, and today we get to interview Katelyn Curran. So Katelyn Curran is a dedicated trauma-informed coach, neurodivergent community leader, and founder and CEO of Curran Compass Coaching. With a passion for helping individuals transition from surviving to thriving, Katelyn draws from her own experiences of childhood trauma to guide others on their healing journey. As a wife and mother of 5, she understands the complexities of balancing personal healing with family life. Through her coaching practice and podcast, Healing Echoes, Katelyn advocates for mental health awareness and offers insights into overcoming adversity. With over a decade of experience across multiple industries and 6 years as an entrepreneur, she brings a wealth of knowledge and empathy to her work, empowering others to find strength and resilience in their own stories. That's great. That's a great bio. Oh my God.
It's so
Hi.
amazing to me when I hear about myself. I'm like, oh, am I doing all this?
Yeah, like that's me. I did that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. I'm so excited to get to talk to you.
I know, I'm very excited.
Yeah. So I guess I do want to preface this for the listeners. This is heavy stuff today. Okay, so this is, we're going to be talking about traumatic topics, childhood, verbal, emotional, sexual abuse, molestation, alcoholism, like lots of heavy topics that maybe some of you are not in a place to hear about, or if you are in a place, you might just need like a heads up before
Mhm.
listening, like put on some headphones or something if you have, kids around or just other people. Um, so just want to give you all a heads up on that. But I'm so excited to talk to you. I know we've kind of been in touch on and off over months. I don't even know how long
Yeah,
it's
I
been.
think it's been
Um,
months now.
and
We've
I've
had,
just been, like I'm so excited that you're in a place where you're ready to share. And, the internet's great for this of just having a platform to share life where people, who may otherwise would not have come across people to relate to or to be inspired from going through a similar situation. You know what I mean? So
oh yeah, for
I'm
sure.
glad that you're ready to share and
Oh
you have
yeah.
your own practices set up. So,
Yeah,
okay, so I guess my first question would be, um, what would you say your first experience with trauma started as a child? Do you have a specific memory?
I do. For the longest time, it was at the age of 6. And that was when I experienced molestation at the hands of my brother, my oldest brother. But doing most recently, actually doing some hypnotherapy and being able to go back, I actually was able to recall memories as early as the age of 4. So very, very young. I do know that at the age of 4, it wasn't from him. As far as I know, the abuse at the hands of my brother was a one-time incident, as far as I can recall. Um, the other abuse was from my father. And so it's crazy how certain like actual incidents are crystal clear. I can recall them, which isn't always a good thing, as if it was yesterday. And then sometimes it's like years are foggy. It's really weird what trauma can do to your brain, especially when it comes to your memory recall. But yeah, it started really, really young.
Yeah, wow. And I do agree with you on the memory recall thing in general because I have years, especially like childhood years,
Hmm.
or it's just like I don't
Yeah,
I
I don't know.
like I mean, I know I was alive when I was a kid, but like I don't remember anything. So,
Yeah.
and I've heard from Dr. Nicole LaPera, the holistic psychologist, and other
Mhm.
people, talking about as that trauma response of just like blocking out
Yeah.
memories or
Mhm.
periods of time. It is
Yeah.
wild to think about,
Yeah,
but
well,
like,
and especially
yeah.
like that first, what I thought was my first recall at 6, I actually forgot that memory until I was about 12 or 13, and then it just came completely flooding back. And so I've been able to recall it since then, but from 6 to 13, I forgot it ever happened. So yeah, it's really weird how it's like
Mhm.
our brains know what we can handle, and sometimes it just shuts it out.
That's yeah, that's like mind-boggling to
Mm.
me. And
Yeah.
so what was that like when? it came back to you? Was it just like you were just chilling and then like it just popped in your head?
Yeah, I think the way I remember it is that I woke up one morning remembering, and so my initial was like, was that a dream? Like, it's a weird dream to have, but it was also extremely realistic. And so I think I sat with it for like a day before I just brought it up to my mother, um, super casually, but that's a whole nother bag of worms to open, the things that we would talk about as if we were talking about the color of the sky. Um, but yeah, I just woke up one day and I could remember everything that happened, where it happened, who was there, what it felt like, um, and just didn't really know what to do with it. At the time, I was not angry. Um, I feel like I immediately had like forgiveness for him. But especially recently, I've realized that a lot of what I thought was forgiveness was conditioning, especially at the hands of my mom. I'd already really been conditioned to feel empathy for my abusers instead of for myself. So I
Mhm.
didn't really process anger towards that until recently. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
I'm actually very mad.
Yeah, right? Like, oh, it's
Yeah.
okay for me to be upset about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is so wild.
Well, it
And
was just,
like, yeah,
mhm.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
It was just always written off as like, oh, he's a boy, which especially as women, we've heard that way too much in our lives. But also like, he's going through puberty, and so he has all these hormones and he doesn't know what to do with them. And that's literally what my mom was telling me. And it wasn't until recently recalling this memory that I was like, he was 16. It wasn't like his puberty had just started. And if you know my family, he was a very mature 16-year-old. He'd already graduated. He actually owned his own business. So I'm like, those excuses
Yeah,
don't
no,
stand
that
here,
doesn't fit. Yeah.
which is where I went from automatic forgiveness to, wait a second, I'm mad. Like, this is
Yeah,
not,
like what the fuck? Like that's not
yeah, a
okay.
whole new processing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So this leads to my next question that I'm glad I had it written down, but yeah, did you have coping skills for this? Like how did you like as a child, I mean now I
Mhm.
know it's like
Yeah, as
how
a
did
child,
you
no, I didn't. I really just pushed everything down. Um, so for listeners, I grew up in rural Florida, 10 to 15 minutes outside of city limits, so very, very removed. We lived on a dead-end street. I was homeschooled. Like, I didn't have any resources. I didn't have a guidance counselor. I didn't have really even a pastor. We bounced from church to church once we actually started doing that with my mom. And my parents just really had the like ideology, so to speak, of you keep it in the family. We might discuss our issues with each other, but we don't take it outside of our home. So I didn't have anybody to talk to. I think the only like coping mechanism I used was journaling because I loved to write and I loved poetry. Um, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't have any of my childhood journals.
Oh
I've
no.
actually lost all of them, but I think that might be a good thing that I don't have the in the moment processing that I was doing back then because it was
Mhm.
a lot. It was very heavy. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it definitely helped get me through it.
Yeah.
Even though there wasn't ever anybody reading them, it felt like I was talking to someone, and that process definitely helped.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, even from yeah, myself journaling, people use prayer in that way,
Yeah.
of just it's like y- yeah, like you said, it's like you're talking it out, but
Yeah.
it's like
It's
to
just like,
yourself.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just getting it out. I still journal to this day, and really
Mhm.
sometimes just getting the words or the feelings out of your own mind is very clarifying or releasing. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I had a thought too that the fact that you've lost these over the years,
Mm,
like that is like cathartic in a way. It's just like that release.
yeah,
Um, it's not
definitely.
holding you down, like it's not weighing
Yeah.
you down. It's you're moving forward from that.
Yeah, I think I'm able to process what I remember without having to be re-traumatized in a sense by my own self
Mhm.
from when I was
Yeah.
going through it. I think if I had them and I was able to read and reread and reread what I was going through or what I was feeling, I don't think it would do any good at this point.
Yeah, that would be hard
Yeah.
to revisit because it's like you're revisiting it or revisiting it from like your younger
Yeah.
lens, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So how I'm just trying to understand, like, so in your experience, it was talked about in a way that was uh what's the word? Desensitized or like
Yeah.
like it wasn't as severe as it actually is.
Hmm.
Were a lot of topics in that realm talked about in that way? Just from what you can remember from
Yeah,
the beginning?
especially when it was like I was the subject, which it now is where I've realized like I have no empathy for myself. I don't show myself any grace because growing up, topics that should be very important or not necessarily taboo, but there's a certain way to discuss them, never were handled with that care. And I definitely was always like the fall guy, so to speak. So if it was happening to me, it wasn't an issue for anyone else. No one considered how I felt about it. Um, so even like not abuse, but like for instance, when I was 16 and I was sexually active, or I had been for a while, but this was what my mom considered me becoming sexually active. It was discussed with my brothers. Like it was discussed with my family, which I'm like, she's your 16-year-old daughter. It's not really something you should be telling her brothers. It's weird,
No.
you know?
Yeah, that's
And in the moment,
personal.
even I was like, why did she tell them that? Like, this is embarrassing. It's not something I
Yeah.
want to know. But everything was handled that way. I mean, I wasn't even a legal adult when my mom told me, like in conversation, that she'd noticed red flags when it came to my dad. And it was, again, just mentioned nonchalantly. And I'm just like, what? How do you just talk about these things that you should be crying, you should be bawling, like your voice should be catching? And it's just like, yeah, I notice. Okay. Yeah.
But
Everything was handled
like
like that.
notice, but like it
Yeah.
didn't matter, or like, do you? I'm just
Yeah,
like,
I still do that
huh?
sometimes.
Like what?
Trying to wrap your
Are
head around it.
yeah, are you were you the youngest
I
sibling?
am the youngest. Yeah, I have three older siblings. So I have two older brothers and an older sister in that order.
What was it because you were the youngest that like was other siblings having similar experiences
Um, yes
that you
and
know of?
no. I do actually, out of my mother's own mouth, she has admitted that she believes every single one of her children have been sexually abused by one person or another in their lifetime. I know my sister has, she's confided that in me, so I know that they were all going through things. And like you referenced in the beginning, my father was an alcoholic, so there was always some form of abuse in the household, but I definitely think the others got more sympathy than I did. I was like seen as the problem child even before I really became a problem child. Um, they just didn't have that care for me. I don't know um their justification for it. I know there isn't any justification for it, but
Mhm.
they've never really given me a reason why it was handled differently with me.
That's wow.
Yeah.
D- um, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. Would you say they, okay, maybe this will make sense if I like compare it to myself. So like
Yeah.
when I was a teen, I was
Mhm.
very, moody, emotional, like
Yeah.
just very angry.
Yeah,
And
teenage
but
angst.
like yes, but like my parents, like now that I'm an adult, I can look back and be like, they didn't have the tools to
Mm,
know
yeah.
how to handle my feelings.
Right.
They were not doing inner work on themselves, and
Right. They weren't
especially like
equipped. Yeah.
yeah, and so it was just not in their range of comprehension or like
Yeah.
at the time. So in that regard for your family, like was there no awareness or like did
Yeah,
that like they realize like this is not cool or like or was it just so
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth. So, especially being a mother myself, I always have like very mixed feelings about things. Um, as far as my mom is concerned and the way she handled it, I definitely feel some empathy towards her because I know she was a victim of abuse herself. Alcoholic, verbal, and sexual as well, again, from the hands of her own father. So it was definitely very generational. And she never healed from it, especially that generation. They didn't have the tools or the knowledge that we do now. And so, to some degree, I can excuse some of her behavior as just not knowing what to do. And then others, I think it was just a lack of care. And the same goes for my dad. If I didn't know him as an abuser, I would say it was just ignorance. But majority, yeah, I think they just didn't care to learn how to handle things.
Mhm.
And I make jokes about like being the problem child, but I didn't really become that like teenage acting out until hitting like right at 13, right as a teenager, and it was because of an escalation of abuse and trauma in the household. But no one stopped long enough to figure that out. It was
Mhm.
always just like pointing the blame, pointing the finger at Katelyn. You know, she's acting out, she's a problem, she's stressing us out. Instead of going, okay, why? You know, we're separating, you know, even if because my mom pled ignorance to the sexual abuse for a very long time. So even if you weren't aware of that, you knew he was an alcoholic. You know that there's been screaming matches in front of the children since they were little. I mean, he used to chase my brothers around. So like there's been abuse. You didn't stop to think maybe your teenager was acting out because she's going through some things. No, it was always just you do what you're told and very strict. There was no grace given to any of us really.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that shows the generational
Yeah.
shift for sure, because yeah,
Yeah.
especially like you said, how they, like our parents, how they grew up was
Hmm.
very much like
Yeah.
you do what you're told, you just sit, you don't
Mm.
cause issues, you don't speak unless you're spoken to or
Yeah, and they
whatever.
just
So,
carried that down to the next
mhm,
generation. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will like especially my children because they're so curious about what my life was like as a child, and I only share so much with them because of just how traumatic my life was. I do tell them I was abused, but I don't go into detail. But they'll like hear certain phrases that like boomers use, and they'll ask like, "Oh, did your parents say that to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, these are things I grew up hearing. You know,
Mhm.
you eat what's on front of your plate or you don't eat. You know, you'll go to bed hungry. That you know,
Yeah.
don't speak unless spoken to. You're supposed to be seen, not heard. All of those things. Yes, that's what I grew up with. Even being homeschooled, my parents were not gentle parents at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wow. So what I mean, I've kind of heard of the what's the my brain, I can't think of the word, that the
Okay.
phrase, the
Mhm,
expression of like when people are hurt, it
mhm.
comes out as hurting other
Right.
people,
Yeah.
and so you said your mom had some similar ish like
Hmm.
struggles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, do you have a lens of seeing your father in that way too, that trying to understand how he got to the way he was, you know what I mean?
If it was just alcoholism, I'd say yes, but because of the sexual abuse, no. I can't ever try to understand any sort of, especially since I was a child, pedophilia,
Mhm. Yeah.
but especially when it comes to your own flesh and blood. Again, being a parent myself, I just can't, there's no grace there.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's just like, no, you're disgusting.
Mhm.
When it comes to the alcoholism, definitely he was raised by an alcoholic. My parents actually grew up with each other in the same small town in Michigan. So everyone there lived the same type of lifestyle. They were all factory workers, they all drank, everyone was an alcoholic, everybody was abusive. So like this is what they grew up with. This is the only way they know. And in that I had sympathy for him until it went the other direction. And then it was
Mhm.
like, no,
Yeah.
you get nothing from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Yeah, that's completely understandable.
Yeah, I even do that sometimes with my mom. Again, like I try to see it through that sympathetic lens, but being a mother myself, I can't imagine knowing things or at least having red flags and not doing something.
Yeah.
So that's again where even if I wasn't the victim, I would still be like, why did you not take action?
Hmm.
Especially as a mom, like you're supposed to just have that inherent need to protect your children and
Oh,
not
yeah.
having it, I can't wrap my head around.
Yeah, it's hard for me too, as well.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like this way, like my brain, I'm just like trying to comprehend, like with also with like true crime
Yeah.
podcasts and things, like
Mhm.
just like why did it get there? Like what is I
Yeah,
that's why I'm like the brain is so interesting to me because I'm just trying to like
definitely. I love it.
understand,
I've always been obsessed with true crime, and maybe my life is a part of why. I've always been obsessed with the human, the mind, the psyche, and why we tick, and what gets us where we're going, kind of thing. Sometimes I'm just stumped. Sometimes
Yeah,
I don't know if we'll ever find the answer for things.
exactly. It
Yeah.
doesn't just you just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Is
even
there a
too,
reason?
right? And I think even like the people
Hmm.
that are behaving a certain way or whatever, like they don't even know
Yeah.
why
Yeah,
if
sometimes they just have
either.
that urge or their thought and they go with it. They don't
Hmm.
know why it's there. They just go with whatever they're feeling or thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. What who was the first person outside of your familial unit to
Mhm.
that you confided into about this type of
Oh goodness.
situation?
I think the first person I ever admitted out loud to that this was something that had happened to me, I didn't tell anybody in my childhood. I didn't tell anybody until I was an adult. And I think it was like my first serious relationship. So it would be the father of my firstborn biological child. And that was used against me. So I definitely took my unhealed childhood
Mhm.
trauma and I took it into adulthood. I would take it into two domestic abuse relationships. So it wasn't until after those happened that I really started healing everything.
So what would you say was the first start to healing that after going through like your childhood and then the adulthood struggles?
I think
What was the
especially,
tipping point?
yeah, I think especially after my first, I started healing my first domestic abuse relationship because I realized that I was falling into the pattern of especially childhood abuse survivors, especially unhealed. They generally do take it into adulthood. And there's always things that are going to kind of be a struggle that we have to look out for. And I was like, and becoming a mother definitely pushed me. I became a mom at 19 and I became a single mom when she was 3 months old. And I knew if I wanted better for her, I had to be a more healed person to be a better mother. Um, so that's really what started me like doing the research, finding out more about therapy and all the different, there's so many different modalities.
Yeah.
But after my second child, um, I'd done so much healing, and when I met her father, I felt like I just went so far back. And something just snapped in that relationship right before I left him, where I was just like, I'm not doing this. I've suffered enough. I'm not putting my kids through this. And
Mhm.
that's really when I started doing like the really heavy work, which is what got me into like the inner child healing and the hypnotherapy and those more in depth. They're definitely
Mhm.
not fun when you start them. It
No.
can be really hard work, but it's definitely worth it.
Mhm. Can you describe what that was like? What so if someone's not familiar with
Hmm.
inner child, they're like, I mean, the phrase gets thrown around a lot, but
It
like, what
does.
does that actually entail?
For me, it was definitely sitting with my emotions, which sounds so basic, but I didn't realize that a lot of what I feel on a daily basis and even my reactions to things are not adult Caitlin. They are my child because she was so unhealed that she was still like very much at the forefront. When somebody said something to me that was slightly felt like rejection, I could bawl about it because it was the little me that was being rejected, and had dealt with so much of that feeling. So it was really just sitting with my emotions and figuring out why they were being triggered, and how to heal those triggers. That's another term that gets thrown around.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, a lot of people see it as a bad thing, when I believe we can see triggers as a notice of something that still needs to be worked on. And that's kind of how I viewed it. Like, yeah, it's not fun getting upset or getting hurt, but this is telling you there's still work to be done. So
Mhm.
even now, if something triggers me a little bit, I'm like, whoa, let's sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
Figure out what's going on here. Yeah, just spending a
Yeah.
lot of time in, as much as sometimes it's not good to be in your head, sitting with myself and my emotions and figuring out, where it was coming from.
Yeah, like in your head enough to dig enough to
Yeah,
figure that out.
yeah,
That was very profound what you said about inner Kate, like that was not
yeah,
adult Caitlin responding, that was inner Kate or, younger
yeah.
inner Caitlin. Yeah, like younger
Well, her
Caitlin.
too. Yeah, I think meditation also is really huge for me, especially when you're trying to connect with that inner child, because it kind of lets you put your current reality on pause and get in touch with that. One of the first times I did like a super in-depth meditation, I actually seen childhood me, and so that was really healing. And I still do those, especially guided meditations, to this day, because it's just
Mhm.
extremely helpful. Especially when you've been through as much different kinds and extensive abuse as I have, it's never gonna be something that's done. Healing isn't linear, it's never
Yeah.
over.
Mhm.
It just gets better, it gets easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some days, you think you've processed so much of a certain thing, and then it'll
Mhm.
just randomly come up, and it's like, this is a
Yeah.
lot right now. I can't,
Yeah,
like,
you're like,
why?
ugh.
Like, it's unexpected. That's happened
Yeah.
to me too.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah,
hmm.
well, especially with so much of it being surrounded, like, in my childhood, and I have good memories. So there's some times where just like a certain sound or a smell or even a brand will bring back like bad feelings. And I'm like, whoa, what was that? Like, I thought we were done with this. And so
Yeah.
I'll have to be like, okay, like, let's revisit this. What's going on? And then put it to rest. Yeah.
Mhm. What yeah, I really love the guided meditation bit that you said,
Yeah.
because for myself, I really enjoy guided meditations too.
Yeah.
I've done a couple inner child ones, but I think that is something I do want to move more into, because like as we're talking, I'm like, why don't I remember my childhood?
Yeah.
And I'm not like jumping to conclusions like, okay, something horrible happened to me
Right.
without, like,
Without
I'm not gonna freak
knowing.
myself out for,
Right.
without any reason to, but it is just weird, like how he said, we just like forget time period. So it's like,
Right. Well, and
why is
even
that
if
the
it wasn't
case?
like something as negative or extensive as that, or, the things that I've been through, it could be something else that especially as a child, that your brain received as traumatic. It could be something as simple as watching a car crash happen in front of you.
Mhm.
Um, and that's another thing that I stress, is that trauma looks so different for so many different people. What's traumatic to one person could be another, just another Tuesday for somebody else. We all receive things differently, especially as children. So if it's your childhood memories that you aren't remembering, it could be from a lot of different things. And that's why I really like the guided meditations or the hypnotherapy, because they really help retrieve those memories, or at least give you enough context clues as to why they might be hidden.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific hypnotherapist you work with consistently? Or
So
do you
I've
like
only
kind of try?
started doing it, so I've only done one, maybe two sessions. And I use a woman that I met through a community here. Her name's Kirsten Proud. And she's phenomenal, because she not only does the hypnotherapy in between the hypnotherapy sessions, she does a Luna light healing session. So as you're bringing up the trauma, you're processing and then releasing it, which is, I think, really important, because
Yeah.
if you're dragging things up, you don't want to hold on to it.
Oh, yeah, right?
And that it's just been really, really life changing. I also started doing EMDR with my personal like talk therapist.
Mhm.
And that's also been really helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard good things about EMDR. I'm not quite familiar with what all it entails either, but I've heard, like heard the term thrown out. Is that the eye movements?
Yeah. So some people do just eye movements, and then some people do the tapping on your body as you're
Hmm.
like going through it. I know there's some people that don't, I think there's some people that don't consider the tapping EMDR. It might have a different term. Um, but I've seen people kind of cross reference them both. And the tapping is what I kind of started doing with my therapist. And it's definitely very helpful for me because I didn't realize how much of the trauma emotion I had stored in my physical body. So being able to release that has been, yeah, I feel light again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize how tense I was.
Isn't it wild? Is that the same as like EFT tapping?
Mhm. Yeah,
Oh,
very
okay.
similar. Yeah.
That's great. I didn't realize that. I do like EFT tapping, so
Yeah.
that's so neat that they kind of
Yeah.
cross
Well,
paths. Yeah.
like this community that I have now currently in the place that I live and I've built within like the last year or so, I've met so many different people who are, either practitioners or one or the other or multiple. Um, there's one of the good things that have come from it being talked about more is that there's more people that are looking into doing it professionally or that do it professionally. And so we actually have healers out there now and not people just talking about it, which is
Yeah,
nice. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, giving you the tools you wish you had,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And also, I think even I mean, I don't know if are they still alive, your parents?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as I
Yeah,
know.
even just yeah, like giving not just like in your case you tools, but like the parents or grandparents, like
Yeah.
older generations, those tools that they
Yeah.
didn't have for even longer amounts of
Definitely.
time.
Yeah. Even for themselves. Even if it's not just like, oh, let me learn about this so I understand what the younger generations are doing, they can
Mhm.
look into it for their own healing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it always makes me really happy. I always hold out hope that, um, you know, the older generations will start looking into things and learning ways to better themselves for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, I made the joke about, as far as I know, because I'm no contact with my father, I have been for quite some time, and I'm like on and off again, no contact with my mom.
Mhm.
She likes to wiggle her way back in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that can you speak on the importance of setting boundaries for people who have been through,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, definitely.
situations
Um,
like yours or worse or not even as worse, but just in
yeah.
general?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
let's
I think
have that.
boundaries in life, period, are very important, but especially if you've been through something traumatic or um, the person that you're dealing with is causing, um, bad emotions or bad situations. I do think they're extremely important. They're not always easy to put in place. And what I've told friends or like clients that I've worked with is that you should never have to repeat a boundary more than 3 times, because then there's no excuse of like, oh, I didn't know how, or I didn't know what you wanted. If you stated yourself very clearly, more than twice, that person has heard you. They're choosing not to respect your boundary.
Mhm.
And at that point, you really are faced with, well, what do I do from here? Do I allow them to disrespect my boundary, or do I pull back?
Mhm.
Um, Goodness, I've just lost my train of thought. I hate it when I do that.
It happens.
Well, I'm neurodivergent as well. I have ADHD, excuse me. So sometimes I'm like on a spiel and my brain will just be like, no,
Uh-huh.
we're not
It's like,
going,
okay, we're done now.
we're done now. Oh,
Yeah.
that's what it was. Especially the more like these terms become popular, a lot of people think that a boundary is setting a rule upon another person, and it is not. It's setting rules for yourself and how you want to be treated. So you
Mhm.
can't tell someone you're not going to talk to me this way. You can tell them I don't want to be talked to this way, and if you do, this is what will happen. And I think that's really important because
Yeah.
if you think you're putting a rule on someone else, you're going to have a rude awakening that that doesn't work. You can't tell people what to
It,
do, and they're
yeah.
rarely going to listen if you try.
Mhm.
That they're not receptive to that. People don't like boundaries anyways, but especially if you're like, you're not gonna do this, they're not going to listen to you.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
so true. I mean, even
Yeah.
for myself, I'm like, yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true. You have to, and that goes to show the importance of language and like the way you phrase things to
Yeah.
people. Just that shift of like, you can't do this, or versus
Yeah.
like, if you do this, this is my
This is what's going
response.
to, yeah, this is
Mhm.
what's going to happen. And that's definitely what I noticed with my, like, with my mother's relationship, because I initially went into it like, you're not going to talk to me like that anymore. Because I didn't want to be spoken to like that.
Mhm.
And that didn't work. If anything, it made her more angry and speak to me in a more disrespectful way. And so when it became, okay, I can't control you, and if you choose to continue speaking to me like this, I'm going to cut contact. Then that's what happened, because she chose
Yeah.
to continue speaking to me this way, and I'm just going to remove myself from the equation.
Mhm.
And we don't talk. That's her
Yeah.
choice. And I think that's what's really difficult for people, and that's why a lot of people don't like setting boundaries, is that sometimes it means losing people or losing the
Mhm.
comfort of the way you used to have them. But you're faced with the
Ooh,
question of whether or not they're worth being in your life if they don't value you.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Have you set boundaries with your other siblings?
Yeah, so I kind of lost contact with my oldest sibling when he, not like in the very beginning of his relationship, but with his current partner, they're married now. She just kind of had that personality where she really wanted to drive a wedge between him and his family, and it worked.
Mhm.
Um, and I tried on multiple occasions to kind of put myself back out there. Even when I had my youngest daughter, I was like, "Hey, you have another niece," and he was like, "Congratulations." That's all I heard from him. And that was my boundary of like, I'm not going to keep attempting if he's not. He clearly
Mhm.
doesn't want to put in any effort to have a relationship with his sister, so we'll leave it alone. Um, my second brother, we're like friends on social media, but we don't speak. And I don't know if that's just life's taken us different ways. He did
Mm.
have some issues for a while, and that's the boundary I put up with him was I don't want to hear this.
Mhm.
Like very down the rabbit hole conspiracy theories. And I was like, we're not going here. And it was a thing for a while where you really nobody could communicate with him without him trying to drag you into these debates. So that was a boundary. Like, I'm not going to talk to you if this
Mhm.
is all we can talk about. So we kind of just
Yeah.
stopped talking one on
Mhm.
one. And then actually with my sister, kind of the same thing. When I put up a boundary with my mom, she decided that she was going to go no contact with me and just disappeared. So I haven't heard from my sister since November of last year. And that kind of shows the relationship that my mom and my sister
Mhm.
have. They're very much two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
So, and I'm refused to reach out. I've
Yeah.
always kind of been the one, especially in my family and in my sibling relationships, who always initiates the healing conversations. I'm the one who apologizes or changes my behavior. So I'm like, no,
Mhm.
no more. I'm over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really showed a lot, especially this last year. The last time I set a boundary with my mom and my sister was actually a day and a half before my wedding. So for them to choose then to kind of disappear and back away was, yeah. I was like, all
Yeah.
right, I've had enough.
Yeah.
Like this has
It's
went
just
too
not.
far into my adulthood. I'm not doing this
Mhm.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And that shows how strong you are to, even around such a moment that should be
Mm.
a happy, beautiful time, like you're still willing to
Yeah.
not let excess drama,
Yeah.
mess that up even more, even though that
Yeah.
would have been still like hard to have to do that then, like now, like
Yeah.
now you want to start this.
Well, and that's what my husband at the time, I mean, he supports any decisions that I make, obviously, and he's always encouragement of what's best for me. But at the time, he would say, are you sure you don't want her to still come? Are you sure you don't want to have whatever conversation you need to have for her to be there? And I was like, no. And my reasoning was, this person is not going to change. Um, the past shows that. If she does, I'll be thankful for it. But I do not want her in this memory if in 7 years she's the same person she was yesterday. I would rather
Mm.
her not be in this memory. And that's why I made that decision. Thankfully, I have enough family that I married into that we were still shown up for. Besides my biological children, there was not a single other person at my wedding that I was related to. So
Wow.
my chosen family is my family.
Mhm. Wow. And that
Yeah.
too, like, I had a thought and now I'm like trying to figure out what
Which
to
piece
branch
of thought?
into. Um, the importance of finding community and like even
Yeah.
if the family you grew up with did not treat you right,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean you're doomed forever. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like you can still find that comfort and community with, friends or,
definitely.
a new partnership and their
Yeah.
family like you did.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely think that the family we choose sometimes is at the same par, if not better, than the family we're born into, especially for survivors.
Mhm.
And community is something I talk a lot about, especially because it's not something I had until like the last 2 years. Um, and so I talk about it a lot. It's something I always tried to have as a child, as a teen, and as a young adult, and it just never worked. But I never gave up. This last time I was like, you know what, let me try one more time. Let me put myself out there. And it worked. And I have a community that actually aligns with me and my values and my goals and who I am as a person now, which I never had before. And the family I married into are incredible. My mother-in-law showed up that day because my mom was supposed to bring my bouquet and she was supposed to bring a headband for me. So I didn't have either of those things. I wasn't gonna have a bouquet to walk
Mhm.
down the aisle with. And I texted my mother-in-law the night before my wedding and was like, "Can you bring a bouquet for me?" And she's like, "Yeah, what do you want?" So I sent her like a picture and I was like, "It doesn't have
Mhm.
to be this one exactly." She showed up with that exact bouquet and the headband that I'm wearing actually. Let me pick out of her headband. She's like, "Which one do you want?" And so it just kind of goes to show like this woman has known me for less than a year and she's showing up because she sees me for who I am in my entirety and she
Mhm.
loves me for that. And it just really goes to show that sometimes those connections are better. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, way better. That's
Yeah,
beautiful. That's such a sweet story.
I know. I'm like, I love you.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really touching. I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
Um, and I guess this is kind of
Mhm.
backtracking a smidge. Have your siblings ever, like, on their own, brought up to you, like, "Hey, I'm sorry this happened," or, like, "Are you okay from this?" Like, any acknowledgement that, like, "Hey, that wasn't okay."
No, not really. I've never admitted to my younger, he's older than me, but the younger brother, what
Mhm.
happened. I don't think he's aware, especially the sexual abuse. I'm not sure he's aware it ever happened, except for the sexual abuse for my brother. He was present for the discussion about that because it was a whole
Mhm.
family discussion. Um, the brother that abused me has never apologized. And it's actually come up when we were adults and it was never something he addressed. Um, and I again don't think he's aware of what my father did. It's not something I ever really talked to them about,
Mhm.
especially because they have such a great relationship with my dad. I don't know that it would be believed even if I was to
Mhm.
tell them.
Yeah.
And my sister never has. My sister has actually like slut shamed me because of the way that I became hypersexual because of the abuse. So that's also something that's very
Mhm.
common. And even that she's never apologized for. I think the closest she's come to an apology was I don't remember saying that, but if I did, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, which to me
Oh.
isn't an apology. So
No.
no.
Yeah, it's more so for,
Yeah.
to say you tried, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of the, "I'm sorry it made you feel that way," which is not an authentic apology.
Yeah.
So, in my eyes, no, none of them have ever really addressed it or
Mhm.
apologized for the things that have happened. No.
Would you say that makes it easier to set boundaries then because of that?
Yeah, um, it yeah, just kinda leads to the disconnect, makes it a little bit easier, especially with my brothers. Like, I love them still. I definitely have, like, that old school mentality of family and what family's supposed to be. So
Mhm.
sometimes I still have that like knee jerk reaction of like, I'd do anything for them. And I'm like, no, I love
No.
them and I wish them well, but at this point, there's a separation there.
Mhm.
Um, and with my sister, it's definitely become easier. We've talked about abuse that happened in the household, especially because she was still in my life when I went down the healing path that I've went down, and then the professional starting my own podcast and publicly telling my story. She was present for that period of my life. But things started happening, conversations started happening that made me uncomfortable. And there was actually a point where she insinuated that what I was remembering was her abuse and not my own. So it definitely made it a lot easier to separate. Yeah.
Yeah. That's confusing.
Yeah. I was like, no, maybe, just maybe we were both abused. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be one or the other. There doesn't have to be one victim in a household.
It's not like a competition. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, but
It is though,
you know.
especially in this case with the way our relationship was and especially how she reacted to the abuse. Especially as children, what she seen as favoritism was actually grooming. And I tried to explain that to her later on. She's like, well, you were his favorite. You went everywhere with him. And I'm like, I wish I hadn't. Like, this was not a good thing that was happening.
Mhm.
And I can see where as a child you would think that. But now as an adult, you should be able to pull yourself back and be like, no, I don't wish I was in Caitlin's shoes because she was being groomed and abused. I don't
Yeah.
think she's able to do that. She's still jealous of the relationship that I have with my dad.
Like
So
attention thing.
yeah, I'm like,
Mhm.
It's not a competition. You wouldn't have wanted to be in first place, I promise you."
Yeah, right?
And if he did abuse you in any of the ways that he abused me, I am incredibly sorry. That sucks. I wouldn't have wished it on anyone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. And I guess that goes to show the difference in maturity or just like awareness of
Yeah.
perspectives. Is that the right way
Yeah.
to say that?
Yeah.
Like if she's just not getting it in that way, then there's
Yeah.
nothing you can say.
No, it's just like, okay.
Mhm.
Let me wash my hands of this because
Yeah,
this conversation is gonna go nowhere.
exactly.
Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, then what made you decide, like, I want to share this, I want to start a business and a podcast and like turn my struggles into a platform for helping people thrive out of it?
Mhm. Um, so I think part of what led me to wanting to tell my story, especially publicly, is because I was never even able to tell it privately. So, like we discussed, I haven't told a majority of my family. I've never told extended family. I haven't really told friends. And I'm tired. I was tired of pretending like my family was something it wasn't, and therefore I was something I wasn't. I was able to relate to a lot of things, and it would come up in situations, and they were like, "How would you know that? How would you know what it's like to be a victim?" And I'd be like, "Oh, that's right. I
Mm.
haven't told anybody." So
Mhm.
I really just wanted to own me, wanted to own my story. And for the longest time I'd wanted to do a podcast, but I could never figure out what I wanted to do it on. Um, and it just clicked one day. I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make a platform and I'm gonna tell my story. And I actually launched it in September, which is Suicide Awareness Month. And it's an awareness that's really near and dear to my heart because I have attempted suicide 3 times. And I've dealt with suicidal ideations and such. So I was like, this is the perfect time to launch, especially a podcast that has so many like taboo subjects in it.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I think I had it for about a week or so before I posted like looking for guests because I was like, oh, this doesn't just have to be for me.
Mhm.
And right away, I had like 13 people that wanted to be guests. So it took off very
Yes.
quickly. And then I realized not only survivors, I could have professionals and things like that. And so it grew from there. And then I took it from just being podcasting to promoting on social media and just posting about those subjects and posting snippets of my story. um, I had connected in that community that I built with a business and life coach, and we did a session together. And I'd been so burnt out on what I was doing professionally. I've been doing it for 10
Mhm.
years. And I was like, I want to help people. And then it just dawned on me like, you have extensive knowledge in this, especially
Yeah.
because you have firsthand knowledge. You can help people.
Mhm.
Even before certifications, you can do that.
Yeah.
That's what got me into trauma informed coaching. Um, and so that's where I'm at now. And the like newest project that I'm working on actually is writing my book, writing my life out. So yeah, it's really exciting. I
I'm
love
so
to write, so I'm like,
excited.
I'm putting this into words.
Yes, that
Yeah,
can be so helpful. Oh my gosh,
it has been, yeah.
that makes me excited
It's
because
like a whole new
mm,
way of, yeah, trauma processing. Especially because the way that I've really been doing it is as things have been triggered, especially because it pulls memories and it makes them so fresh that I sit down at my laptop and I start
mhm,
typing away. And yeah, it's been very therapeutic. I always ground before and I ground after, I clear after so that I can leave
yeah.
the energy in the pages,
That's
not
yeah,
take
that's
it with
important.
me. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, what got me so excited about hearing that is because I just listened to or watched the podcast. Bruce Brackett. Do you know who he is?
It sounds familiar.
It's bw.positivity on Instagram. He does reels. He's just, very like a motivational speaker.
Mhm.
Um, and if you ever see the reel with like he has curly hair and he'll like do the fan and he's like
Oh,
negativity be
yes.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, he just wrote a book about he had like addictions and
Mhm.
things and just wrote his whole book about it and he's been sharing like snippets
Yeah.
and then I just like watched this interview and it was so good of just like that's so powerful that people can share and
Yeah.
it helps so many people out. So I'm
Well,
so excited for you.
thank you. Yeah, I think that's really exciting. And just hearing the word addiction made me think that's part of my story that I've really in writing my story and on the podcast, I'm really owning all aspects of my life, not just my abuse, not just the victimhood, because I did take it into adulthood and I allowed it to turn or start turning me into somebody I'm not. And part of that was struggling with addiction myself. And that's not something until this last year that I even used that word when talking about myself. I never
Mhm,
would have considered myself an addict, but I was. I was also an alcoholic for a certain period of time, and I hated that because I always promised myself I wouldn't be like my dad. But I let the abuse take me there and I tried to drown it. And I
mhm.
never talked about those things. But like if I'm encouraging people to heal, that means owning us and ourselves in its entirety, even the things that we don't like about ourselves or the things we regret doing.
Yeah,
Um, what better way than to lead by example? So yeah, I'm really
exactly.
excited for the book.
Yeah, and that's like the whole shadow work
Hmm.
term of just
Yeah.
like you said taking in the parts of you that are like
Yeah,
oh
you're
it's
like,
like I don't like
oh.
that or like I wish I could go back and like not do what I did.
Yeah,
Um and it's like it feels yucky to like revisit it but it's like you need to push forward.
yeah, yeah. I think we talk about forgiving other people. We never really talk about forgiving ourselves. And if we're gonna heal, you have to forgive the things that you've done or said or whatever, even felt that you aren't happy about. You have to forgive
Yeah.
yourself.
How could somebody eh, yeah, like how would someone do that? Could you give the suggestion?
To forgive yourself? Oh
Mhm.
goodness. It's such a hard thing to kind of put into words, I think. I think it's you start with just accepting that it's something that you've done instead of trying to always push it back to the corner of your mind and pretend like it wasn't there or to excuse it.
Mhm.
Obviously there's reasons for things, but when you can just own like, yep, I did that and it was a shitty thing, then you can move forward to being like, okay, but I don't have to stay in feeling bad about it. Now I can let it go and I can move forward. And I think just owning it, even if it's to yourself, just owning, yep, that's something that I've done, allows you to forgive yourself. You're not pretending like it didn't happen anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, that acknowledgement is so huge too.
Yeah.
And I guess my final question, because I realize we've been talking for like an hour already.
Oops.
um, yeah, right. Um, what can listeners do to be more trauma informed? I know there's like certifications for that, but as
Mhm.
far as just in generalization, how
Yeah.
can people be more understanding um,
Yeah.
with those types of topics? And how can we help people, especially children,
Mhm.
who either we know they're going through that or like they're just struggling, like you don't know what's
Right.
going on, they just like they're struggling. How can we support them?
Um, well, the first thing I'd say is to research. Honestly, we have the world at our fingertips. That is the one benefit to technology and how far it's come. And it's not just a simple Google. I mean, you can find studies done, you can find research, you can watch and listen to psychologists study and learn. Don't stay in your own little closed world because there's so much going on around you. Um, Stop turning your head and not wanting to listen because it's hard to listen. Because my life story is really hard, especially when I go, more in depth into the things that I went through or certain scenarios. Nobody wants to hear that. It's disgusting. It makes your stomach turn. Listen. People need to be listened to. Um, and I think that would really go towards children as well. Notice, slow down, and listen. And especially if a child is coming to you saying like, oh, this is happening, or I don't feel good here. Any way that you can contact, and I know people are like, they don't like reaching up to a higher level, but if you look at the studies at how common childhood abuse is, please contact somebody. If a child is telling you something's happening to them, or they feel unsafe, contact someone that you know can do something about it,
Mhm.
because it is way, way more common than it should be.
Thank you. That's very insightful and helpful. I do want to give you a chance to share, your podcast and your any information on coaching or your social media so people can get in touch with you and learn more about, how to
What I do.
heal. Yeah, how to heal, or
Yeah.
even, if they want to see updates on when your book will be ready,
Definitely.
keep tabs.
So starting with the podcast, actually, yeah, all of my websites are down currently because I'm revamping everything. But the podcast is on pretty much every streaming platform from Spotify to Audible. And it's just Healing Echoes. You can reach me for anything concerning Healing Echoes, the podcast, at healingechoespod@gmail.com. There is an Instagram and a Facebook for it as well, just under its title. And the same with my coaching. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Again, the website's down currently. And then just my basic Facebook is Katelyn Curran, and I share all of my information there. I share snippets of the book. I like to tease people. Yeah, I think especially when it comes to coaching, I don't like have any packages or courses or anything that I promote or sell because I really try to keep it based person to person.
Mhm.
Um, so it would be just, reaching out to me and seeing, how we align and what I can do to help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds great, especially, people's situations were so different, and
Yeah.
based on your experience, you can kind of gauge what do you think would help them process it and stuff.
Yeah, well,
So that's a good way to go
that's kind
about
of why I'm like revamping everything, because for a while I had like the basic, like a boundary course, a trigger course. But I kind of was like, this feels unauthentic to me. I'd
it.
rather
Mhm.
have a discussion and then decide what kind of coaching the person needs and or wants. So
Mhm.
that's how I'm doing it for now.
Yeah, do your
Yeah.
own thing. And that shows more like the more you talk, it's like you are just it's like you're finding more pride and comfort and just being you and what feels
Yeah.
right to you now. That's what you're going for. So that's really admirable. I gotta take some notes of that.
Definitely. I mean, it's been a work in progress, but I took too much of my life trying to fit into a box and or just not knowing who Katelyn was because I always was whoever people told me I was.
Mm,
So
mhm.
now that I know, I'm like unashamed. Here I am, taking
Yeah,
it.
exactly. That makes me so happy.
Like, it's a good feeling.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me and sharing so openly about what you've, experienced. And I'm so excited to just get updates and like check on you and the book
Definitely.
that I'm just the book. I'm already freaking out about the book.
That's awesome. I love your
So
excitement.
yeah.
It makes me feel
Yeah.
amazing. Well,
Oh,
thank you
good.
for having me on,
You're
giving me the
welcome.
platform to not only talk about what I've been through, but to hopefully, be able to help other people. That always feels great.
Good. I'm so glad. So I will link her what's the word? Please help me. Instagram.
Yes.
Instagram.
I was like, I don't know, social media.
Yes, link the Instagram and the podcast, and as she gets her stuff, as you get your stuff, redone, then just tell
Yeah.
me and I'll update the
Okay, awesome.
descriptions and everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank everybody for listening in. I hope you have a great day, and yeah, check her out and check out her podcast, follow her on socials, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.